Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everybody. I have Jason Falls here. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Amy. How are you?
Good. Thanks for, coming on the pod. Let me just tell everybody about you first, and then I'll kind of talk about what we're going to talk about.
Sure.
But so everybody knows, Jason Falls is an influence marketing thought leader, author of Winfluence, host of the Winfluence and Digging Deeper podcast, and most recently, the founder of the Marketing Podcast Network, which PR Talk is proud to be a part of. But today we're going to dig into influence marketing with Jason because he literally wrote the book on it. So I'll just start my first question off for Jason, which is, what is the difference between using influencers and actually influencing, which I think your book talks about?
Yeah, that's kind of the underlying theme of the book. And I think a lot of brands think of influencer marketing as using influencers. If you really reframe it, though, and think about what you're trying to do, you're trying to influence an audience to take action. And so influencers have become a label that basically sort of by default means you're using people with big social media followings, maybe on Instagram or YouTube or TikTok. But if you think about it, what you're trying to do is influence an audience to take action. And that doesn't necessarily mean those people, that definition doesn't necessarily mean they're actually influential. It just means they have a lot of followers on social media networks. What you want to try to do if you ultimately want to, achieve influencing an audience as a goal is work with people who have the kind of trust and relationship with that audience built up so that they actually have influence. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, that might mean and might translate itself into the fact that you're using someone who has an online social media following, because there's plenty of influencers out there on social networks who have that trust and are actually influential. But there's a lot of them that aren't, and sort of knowing the difference between the two, being able to decipher that, and then also thinking beyond the internet to the offline world of people who are influential, I think helps you look at the practice of influence marketing without the R on the end of it, much more strategically.
Okay. I kind of want to dig into that, but let me just kind of revisit this just to make sure I'm understanding. So you're saying, it's not necessarily about the amount of followers an influencer has. It's about, I guess, what they do online. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Very, very much so. In fact, when you are focusing on online influencers, there's a little bit of math that you can do, which is pretty rudimentary, but it'll actually help you understand that point. So let's say, and I'm really bad with math, so I'm going to make this up and try to do a little bit of math in my head. But, let's say you've got someone who has 100,000 followers and they have a 1% engagement rate. So what that means is about 1,000 people are going to really pay attention to what they say, like, comment, and interact with each of their posts. Okay, so if you're looking at the budget to get to someone with 100,000 people, you're probably going to be spending, anywhere between $1,000 and probably $2,000 or $3,000 to engage them in some sort of content, execution. So your return on investment there is not very good if they only have a 1% engagement rate, because only 1,000 people are going to pay attention to it. However, if you have someone who has 25,000 followers, but they have let's say, 20% engagement rate, which is a little high probably. But if you do the math there, you're going to get a lot more actual engagement than the other option, the 100,000 with a 1% engagement rate. And you're not going to spend nearly as much money to engage the person who's got a fourth as many followers. Mm-hmm. So that's just the math of understanding why the number of followers is less important. The engagement rate in that mathematical formula is probably more important. But again, that's trying to put influence into a numerical quantification. Sometimes you got to go beyond that. In fact, I would say often you have to go beyond that and actually analyze their content, look at the type of engagement they have. Are they actually interacting with their fans and followers? Because the ones who do are the ones who have built up a relationship with them, have more trust, and thus have more influence.
Okay. And then how do you take the strategy offline? And I know you said that that's really strategic, so we might not be able to unravel all of that. And I do have some more online questions, but before that, I'm just kind of curious if you could talk about that.
Sure. Well, let's think about it in terms of, in the PR world. I'm a PR guy by trade, right? So think of it in terms of, community relations or maybe investor relations. You're talking to people who are influential and have an impact on the ultimate audience you're trying to reach. But their influence is not predicated on how many followers they have online or even what kind of engagement they have online. So to use a quick case study, we did something at Cornett, the agency where I work. That's my day job. We did a case study recently with the University of Kentucky healthcare system. So basically your, hospital, research university, et cetera. And we launched a campaign with them, and the campaign launch was basically a 2-minute film that sort of highlighted their areas of care. Well, who in the heck wants to watch a 2-minute movie about a hospital? Not very many people. Mm-hmm. So we combined online influence and offline influence to kind of drive engagement around this video. What we did is we did the typical quote unquote influencer marketing, where we found people who were influential and had nice online communities in and around central Kentucky. And we engaged them to go and interact with the video once it launched on Facebook, because we knew a little something about the Facebook algorithm. If you send people to interact with your content in certain ways within, a short time frame after it launches, then it can get some organic lift. So we asked our online influencers to go like, comment, share their story, and then share that video with their followers. But then we also turned to influential people in the community. So the mayor, the president of the Urban League, a popular dentist, a popular real estate agent, the music director at one of the local churches who was active in the arts community. So the reason that we did that was because when people went to the post, just regular, ordinary, everyday people went to the Facebook post and they saw the video and they looked in the comments, they would see the online influencers, which are sort of expected. But then they would see these other influential people from around the community and get a sense that, oh my goodness, everybody is watching this video. Everybody is liking it and sharing it and telling their stories too. Mm-hmm. And so the combination of those two things led to about 800,000 views of this video within the first 30 days that it was launched. Lexington, Kentucky only has about 320,000 people. So wow. We were almost 3x the population in watching this video because we combined those two tactics.
Mm-hmm. Kind of a tactical question. When you asked, for example, the mayor, or let's just say anyone who's not trying to do dances on TikTok, did you, was it kind of just like a, hey, mayor, would you just help us out and look at this video and tell us what you think about it? Or how did you guys approach the mayor?
Yeah, I mean, we literally just reached out to him and say, hey, we'd love your help in sort of spreading the word about this new University of Kentucky healthcare campaign. We have a video. And by the way, the video wasn't just like a sales video. It was kind of done almost cinematographically, if that's a word. It was a movie, really. Mm-hmm. And so it had nice, emotional crescendos and had a little story narrative behind it. And so it was good. It was worth sharing. And so we just reached out to them and said, hey, we're launching a new campaign. University of Kentucky and the University of Kentucky healthcare system is a big employer in your city. Would you mind going and participating? And we did the same thing with some other elected officials. But then, of course, we also had the brand power behind us of the University of Kentucky is not only a big employer in Fayette County in central Kentucky, but it's also a place where a good portion of the population went to college. So there's some brand loyalty there that we were able to capitalize on that made it a little easier than it would be for many brands. But a lot of, well, in fact, all of the 75 people that we asked who were quote unquote influential people rather than influencers, all of them were happy to volunteer and participate in it. We didn't have to pay them anything. Mm-hmm. And then the online influencers, we paid them a modest amount of money, but we didn't have a huge budget for this either. So they were happy to participate.
So you're kind of marrying off and online strategies. So you're doing a offline thing, whether it's a video or whatnot, and then you're getting engagement online for the thing that you've done offline. Is that kind of...
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. In that particular case, we were, basically marrying those two things, a little community relations with a little influencer marketing, and those combined to form a pretty powerful case study that helped kick off a campaign that ended up generating a bunch of user-generated content that we turned into a kind of a content marketing play for the brand as well, because we were asking people to tell their UK healthcare story. Well, now all of a sudden we've got all these reviews that we can turn into blog posts and narrative content on their website to kind of help people make those decisions of where they want to get their healthcare.
Mm-hmm. And so all of this is sounding very PR-y, when you're kind of like reaching out and asking for things. So in your book, you do outline the different ways influence marketing relates to 4 marketing categories.
Mm-hmm.
And so can you explain the PR category with your association aspect?
Sure. So when you think of, I guess it's really good, I think, to frame this with the other ones too. So persuasion is one area you would use influencer marketing. That's a method that you would, a purpose that you would use influencer marketing for. And you can align that to advertising. We all kind of understand that. Association is what I use as the correlation to public relations. And in influencer marketing, when you're looking at association as what you want, kind of the purpose of using it, you're not necessarily asking an influencer to tell their audience to go buy your product, but you're aligning your brand with that influencer and that influencer's audience so that you are a relevant voice in their conversation. So a really good example of this is something we did a couple of years ago. We worked with a bourbon brand, and the bourbon brand was very much a, kind of rugged. You would envision people drinking this around a campfire. It had a lot of outdoor sort of vibe to it. And so we did some research, and we found an influencer that their content sort of aligned. It was Derek Wolf at Over the Fire Cooking. And so his content was all about teaching people how to grill out basically gourmet meals over a fire outdoors. And so we felt like that was a really good audience that we wanted to be aligned with. And we felt like if we were aligned with that audience, it would benefit the brand. So we reached out and did a couple of sponsored posts just to test the waters. And it turns out that Derek's audience really liked this brand of bourbon. And the brand, audience really enjoyed, Derek's content on that channel as well. So we ended up partnering with him to develop an online, basically television series called Over the Fire Cooking that was, presented by the bourbon. And it was much more of a content collaboration and partnership. The bourbon master distiller at the distillery was involved in some of the production. We incorporated other influencers with Derek to provide really good content for these shows. And it was really all about associating the bourbon with his audience and them with the bourbon. Mm-hmm. And basically what it led to a nice lift in perception of the brand. It sort of emblazoned that brand of bourbon with him and his audience. And he became sort of an ad hoc representative of the brand in the online space, which was really positive for the brand.
Yeah, I love it. So basically what that does, though, is helps you own your PR, where I just want to say for different podcasts, for our listeners, if you go back and listen, I think, to Robert Johnson's podcast, he's talking about not just relying on the media to tell our story, but to own the story yourself so that we don't have to rely on somebody else. So what that means is having, something on your website or doing this kind of content that feels newsy and is actually entertaining and helpful. But we don't have to rely on someone to do that. And then actually we have more control over it that way too, because we can kind of get this better engagement, whereas like just some news show at a small news TV station might not even promote a series that's gone out.
Yep.
So
there's a lot of value in that alignment. And I'm working on a project right now with a brand that is, basically home technology products. And so, we've reached out and partnered with someone like David Kogan, who is known online as the Unlocker, and he does some really good YouTube videos and has a good social following. And it's all about what's new in technology. And so he's not necessarily, a home tech or a home appliance person, but the technology that this client is bringing to the table is something that we as the brand want to align with him and his audience, because we feel like if he's talking about our products to his audience, then that puts us in the conversation as being innovative and having great technology. So we're even stepping out of the typical vertical of sort of home appliance, home technology into someone who does a lot more content about televisions and phones and computers. But again, it's all about brand alignment.
Mm-hmm. So then, yeah, speaking of, you're talking about hospitals and technology. And when you think about influencers, you think about like Kardashian types, right? And so I do think a lot of B2B marketers just don't think influence marketing is for them. So what do you say to them? And then also, can you offer some examples of how B2B companies have used influencer marketing?
Oh, yeah. I actually am one of those people who believe that B2B companies actually do influencer marketing a lot better than B2C companies, because
Oh,
we've been
okay.
doing
How?
because we've been doing it for forever. If you think about it,
Mm-hmm.
how did you learn about the latest B2B software your company bought? You probably attended a webinar that featured some thought leader as the featured speaker or expert, person on that webinar. B2B companies have been doing that for decades now, at least since webinars and the internet was available. They've also been engaging, influential people, whether it's academics or technology experts, to go and speak on their behalf at conferences. That's all influencer marketing. You're finding a third-party credible source and bringing them to the table to your prospects to say, look, this person is going to share their expertise with you, which is going to be an association and a conduit of trust that we hope that you'll bring to us, so that you see us as a trustworthy vendor that you could potentially partner with. And
Mm-hmm.
so B2B companies have been doing this for a long time. Any sort of guest webinar, white paper, et cetera, that's all influencer marketing. Probably my favorite B2B example of late is actually, this is a magical communications PR, sort of execution and case study. There is a facilities management company in the United Kingdom called Mitie. It's Mitie, if you want to look it up. And they had a reputation problem a few years ago. They sell supplies, mops and buckets and air fresheners and things like that for facilities to, keep their facilities clean. But they also sell software and all sorts of sort of technology and management innovations that allow you to manage your facilities in sophisticated ways. But they had a reputation of being the supplies, the mop and bucket company. So what they did is they did this report where they did kind of a state of the facilities management world, and they wrote the report internally, but they sourced all of the expert opinions for the report from several hundred influencers within the facilities management industry. I didn't know there were that many in the facilities management industry, but apparently there were. And they reached out to them. They interviewed them. They got quotes from them. Then they took, probably 10 or 15 really popular ones and notable ones in the UK, and engaged them to go to trade shows with them and talk about their expertise on the showroom floor with at the Mitie booth, et cetera. And so whatever metrics they were gauging their reputation on, probably some consumer surveys and whatnot, over the course of, I think it was 18 months, they moved the needle of their reputation meter 200%. Now, they wouldn't share what exactly that meter was, but whatever their percentage of reputation of being a mop and bucket company was before was reduced by 200% after. And so a perfect example of leveraging B2B influencers to change the way the market thinks about you. And the magic of it all was, who's going to share this report once it comes out? But the 200 or 300 influencers you interviewed for it. So now all of a sudden they're going to share that content for free. It was brilliant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then I know that you had another example in your book about, which just kind of relates to PR, because it's Peter Shankman, who is the founder of Haro, whatever, however you call it. I never know. And I think a software company hired him to do a speech or something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah, so Peter Shankman, the case study I believe I used in the book is he did basically kind of the same thing I was just talking about, some guest webinar seminars for software companies. And the way that he set that up is he promoted it on his social channels, and they used trackable links and whatnot so that the software company could understand the traffic and whatnot that he drove to their website. And then what they did is they went back and looked at their Google Analytics after it was all over, and they could track how many people, Peter's event drove to their website, how many people made it to the second phase of their sales process down their funnel. And ultimately they could judge a financial return on that particular piece of content because they tracked every step of the process. So they knew how many leads he drove versus how many conversions he drove. And they could put a numeric value on that investment, which is, again, just using the technology and tools that are out there, but you've got to, plan to measure on the front end to make all that work.
Yeah. And that's very helpful for our industry, PR, because we have our biggest problem in our industry is putting a monetary value to our value. So using influencers could be a way to do that. So if you have one tip for somebody who's in PR, but is kind of just stuck in the more traditional way of PR, so I guess that would be just placing articles in B2B trades or the local newspaper, that kind of thing. What's one thing they can do to kind of ease their way into influence marketing?
Well, I really feel like, and there's people that disagree with me on this, but I really feel like influence marketing is really nothing more than PR in today's world. I think the wall that we have to jump over a bit as PR professionals is looking at influencers and influential voices online and offline as media channels. These are channels of information where consumers are going and they're consuming information. The media landscape is so fractured these days, and the trust in traditional media is so, disjointed these days, that when people and consumers go online, they're looking for signal that rises above the noise because there's so much noise out there. And that signal, almost more often than not these days, it's not traditional media outlets or news organizations. It's individuals who are creating compelling content around a topic or around a vertical. And if you simply look at those, influential voices online as a potential media outlet, and you reach out to them, not necessarily with an agenda or a press release or talking points, and just say, hey, I work with such and such a brand. There might be some real alignment there. How could we partner together to potentially take some ideas back to the brand, or I could take some ideas back to my boss that might put our messaging out there in front of your audience in a way that is relevant to them and that you endorse? And just open the conversation with them. It can't hurt to just ask and have a conversation. And you might find yourself walking down the road of saying, hey, I'm actually managing some influencer marketing campaigns that are working really well for this company.
Yeah. And I do feel like if you just ask questions and connect with people, you get ideas. So you might not work with that person, but you could get an idea, or at the very least, you just want to be connected anyways, if they're in your industry. And the last point, though, kind of 2 points, it kind of goes together, but PR, so influence marketing for us, influencer marketing, which is different maybe than influence marketing. Influencer marketing, sometimes we feel it's not super popular. And influencers are maybe looked at kind of negatively because of the financial aspect. So it's like, yeah, we can call their channel, a little PR channel, something like that. But I don't want to pay. I don't like paying for anything. No, just kidding. I know that right now we have to pay for things and in PR, and I do those little advertorials and this and that. But I'm kind of interested in not paying. So anyway, I don't know.
Sure. So the way that I would think, there's two ways to think about that. First of all, there needs to be a value exchange. You have to remember that these folks, these quote unquote influencers, are not classically trained journalists. They didn't take an ethics class. They don't understand the church versus state. They don't understand what PR really is and what value PR brings to the table. And so their whole livelihood is based on the fact that they get up every day and they create content to build an audience so that when companies come to them, they can charge them to create more content. And so it's their livelihood. So there's two ways to think about this. Number one, there needs to be a value exchange. And so in the B2B space, it's actually a lot easier to find that without some sort of cash payment, because I've told people before, I consider myself and have been considered by other people to a degree a B2B influencer in the marketing technology world. If a company approaches me, I don't ask first for what's their budget or how much they're going to pay me. I ask them for, hey, can I have access to your executives? Can I interview your CEO on my podcast? Can I talk to your product R&D team? Can I have some feedback for your product? Because if I can get involved, I'm going to be much more invested in your success. And that's more valuable to me than a check in most circumstances in that context. But also, too, you have to think that a fashion or beauty or style influencer, or maybe someone who reviews restaurants and bars or liquor or whatever else, that's their livelihood. That's how they pay their bills. That's how they feed their kids, etc. And they are creating content for you. So it's no different than thinking of them as a photographer or a videographer you hire as a freelancer. So you're really actually asking them for three things when you engage influencers. You're asking them for their time, which is valuable. You're asking them for their talent to create content, which is valuable. And then you're asking them for access to their audience. When we think of it in terms of just one of those three, we typically are like, well, they're not worth it. I don't want to pay them. But when you think of it in terms of I'm paying for their time, which I should pay any professional for their time. I'm getting great content out of them that I can use on my channels too, as long as we agree up front that I can do that. So I'm getting assets and deliverables in return that I typically have to pay for. And I'm also getting access to the audience that trusts them for their recommendations on products and services. Now, all of a sudden you look at it and go, oh yeah, we probably need to have a budget for this.
Mm-hmm. Well, especially if you think about that they're creating content for you. I didn't really think of it that way. And so, yeah, that totally makes sense. So thank you. And then another last thing I would say is, the way you explain it makes me think, well, what's the point of some of these news organizations then? But I mean, no, I know what the point is, but you could kind of see how at some point, some of that traditional work at some point, it's not irrelevant, but you can see how it kind of goes away, and maybe understand why newsrooms are shrinking and maybe reporters aren't keeping their jobs.
That's very true. And what I would say to people who are used to and prefer to use the traditional journalists, a lot of them are starting to branch out and, have their own social followings and sort of become influencers in their own right, away from those media organizations. Or if they get laid off, that's kind of what they do. And so reach out to them and say, hey, you're looking for work. I'm looking for content and or someone who can help me, place my messages in various publications or in front of an audience that I know you have. Why don't we hire you as kind of a freelancer to help us create content and allow them to continue to write what they write, but under the auspices of writing it for you? It's a good way to sort of bridge that gap between having a great contact with a traditional media outlet and having someone who, again, you can sort of, for lack of a better term, control the message a little bit better.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate it, and hope that you have a good weekend.
You too. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks for listening. For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.